Good morning to most, good afternoon to others, or actually good afternoon to the viewing audience across the pond. I am your host, Jason Miles, and welcome to another episode 3 of What Fresh Hell, a new show we're trying out where Deep State Kuba gives you updates on the global geopolitical situation as we all prepare frighteningly for World War III. If you're a returning listener, subscriber, or one of our very valued patrons, thank you so much for joining us on this limited early morning series. If you're a new listener, just know I never want to be up this damn early and talking to you. I'm up this damn early. I just don't want to talk to anybody. But seriously, thank you for taking the time to check this out. Please hit like and subscribe. It is a passive gesture that goes a long way in promoting the channel. For viewers of the main show, we will be back tonight at our regularly scheduled time at 6 p.m. Pacific. But no red zone this week. Tonight I'll be joined by Doc Coyle from the metal band God Forbid. And we'll be just two musicians discussing everything from ice raids, Iran, and Billy Corrigan's rock and roll CIA conspiracy. It will be fun, I promise. Now, if you do enjoy all of the diverse programming we provide here on TIR, and you would like to join us for some of our raucous champagne rooms like we had last night, where we created some new racisms, and our movie nights, which we're going to have tomorrow night, then consider becoming a patron or a paid YouTube subscriber for just $3 a month or a one-time payment of $30 for the year. Your small donation goes a long way in making sure that TIR can stay on the air. Now, here's a quote. Quote, "You're witnessing right now the American empire's retreat from the Levant and the Middle East in general." Recently, on an episode of Democracy Now!, Lawrence Wilkerson, retired U.S. Army colonel and former chief of staff to Secretary of State Colin Powell, says the U.S. is at risk of losing its war on Iran, where it's already committed major war crimes. More from Wilkerson, quote, "This is a war with long legs. Trump has completely misinterpreted it. The only one who's interpreted correctly is Bibi Netanyahu, and I think he's ready to use a nuclear weapon," unquote. Iran is not Venezuela or Cuba, and this ill-advised conflict persists, Trump won't be able to hold the media captive with his performance of a victorious leader. The reality is too striking. In cities like Los Angeles, gas prices have said to have spiked as high as $8 per gallon, leaving many Americans not to fall for the existential threat rationale for this war. Here to give us an update on the current situation in the Middle East and take your questions is our very own Deep State Kuba.
Well, hi. Hello, everyone.
I do want to send you a massive congratulations because I watched your appearance on Left Reckoning recently.
Thank you. That show went up yesterday. It was great to talk to Matt and David again, and I hope that we're welcoming some new viewers today from that show yesterday. The Left Reckoning crew, the Majority Report crew, great people.
Yes, they are, and they're people that we know because we used to do some live performances with them. It was in New York and L.A. we did with Matt and David.
New York and LA. That was a lot of fun. That's when I busted out the tracksuit.
That was the first time the tracksuit was worn, and
Slavic formal attire.
Hopefully, it won't be the last. Let's just put it that way. Hopefully, it will not be the last. Kuba, where are we?
That's up to ICE detention officials, isn't it?
Well, yeah. Look, stay the fuck out of the U.S. Let's start there. I think if you stay the fuck out of the U.S., we can yuck it up. We have to do a show in Vancouver anyway because
Yeah, that would be amazing.
That'd be a lot of fun. Haven't been there in a while. Kuba, what is going on today with the situation in the Middle East? I feel like, and I could be wrong here, that there's almost a Bush-like mission accomplished statement trying to come out of the White House. But of course,
I think that's an accurate observation that the way that Trump manages foreign affairs, the way that Trump manages all of his policy decisions is to allow the different factions that are associated with him, whether it's Steve Miller representing this sort of NatCon anti-immigrant strain, J.D. Vance, or Netanyahu, the pro-Israel faction, have them duke it out, have them argue the merits of their different policy preferences, and then settle on a course based on I don't I suppose like his level of indigestion and whether he's been visited by the ghost of Jacob Marley and Jeff Epstein the night before. But and so I think we're seeing that there is a very live debate between a faction which wants a quick exit, declare victory, go home, and a faction that would like to see a longer engagement, potentially boots on the ground in Iran, and a more thorough destruction of Iranian state capacity, defense capacity, regime personnel. We've also heard from Democratic senators, that Elizabeth Warren being chief among them, that also Senator Blumenthal, coming out of classified briefings, that they are deeply alarmed at the lack of a strategic plan, the lack of disengagement strategy, but also the lack of clear victory objectives. They, in their statements, but in the statements that they've been able to make, which are generally framed in the negative, because obviously these are classified, highly sensitive briefings, and they're very visible public officials, so they can't afford to breach confidentiality. But you can say what was not discussed. And apparently, the dealing with the nuclear program and nuclear stockpiles is not one of the objectives that's been presented to them, nor is regime change. They can't go into further detail, but apparently, the destruction of the Navy, missile stockpiles, the capacity to rebuild any defense infrastructure or offensive weapons capabilities, those are the um, objectives that are being pursued right now. The issue is that even if you succeed at wiping out the Iranian capacity to build drones, to build missiles, even if you wipe out another three layers of the IRGC and the government of the Islamic Republic, Iran is a country of 100 million people. It is plugged into Russian and Chinese production and security networks. So all of these capabilities can be rebuilt, probably in the short to medium term, and then the missiles start flying again. So it is difficult to see how you can disengage, right? As much as I would prefer that the United States simply declare victory, go home, and allow the region to rebuild, the Iranians ultimately get a vote. And the Iranians have been clear that this time they're not going to negotiate a ceasefire. This time they don't want any half measures. They want some kind of agreement which will ensure, which will lock in, which will, to flip the script, degrade the American and Israeli capability to threaten Iranian security. Now, what that would look like and how you secure post-war arrangement, which is reassuring enough to the Iranians so that they stop firing, that seems to me like an obvious challenge. There's no clear answer to what they might accept. And if they truly feel that balance of power is shifted in their favor, then they might be making even more maximalist demands, maybe related to the Israeli occupation of Gaza, for instance, or the fate of Hezbollah in Lebanon. One element that hasn't been discussed much in Western media is the fact that Israel has opened very aggressively a front in southern Lebanon. There are ground troops that have poured across the border and are fighting Hezbollah fighters that are attempting to locate and destroy bases for short-range rockets that have been fired into northern Israel. Northern Israel is in a very dicey situation. There's been evacuations and a constant tempo of attacks against settlements and Israeli towns and cities in the north within reach of Hezbollah. So the situation there is very tense and anxious. And I want to start a little. Um, I want to start by talking a little about the information environment. One notable difference between this war and previous campaigns, whether the Trump administration or conflicts before that, is that we've seen significantly less footage of operations from the region than we did, for instance, with the Gulf Wars. There's fewer Western journalists embedded in military units across the region. There's less reporting from Israel, and very frequently the reporting from Israel is prefaced with statements such as, "We can't go into detail about strikes. We can't show you um, where Iranian missiles have hit. We can't tell you what has been targeted because there's an information blackout established by the Israeli government." Similarly, the Gulf states have limited the amount of information that can be broadcast from there. Um, and indeed, in Bahrain, I believe a number of third country nationals have been arrested and charged with serious crimes just for disseminating videos of strikes that happened within their view, right? You take out your phone, you record, you hit upload, and pretty soon you have a serious foreign espionage case lodged against you. And the legal systems in the Gulf are neither transparent nor have substantial protections for defendants. So this could be a very serious situation for anyone charged under the national security regulations, whether in the Gulf, whether in Israel, and of course, it goes without saying that Iran too is very cognizant, is very deliberately controlling the flow of information out of its country. Now, the Iranian incentive is significantly different than those of Israel, the Gulf states, and the United States. The Gulf states, the United States, Israel, and their allies would like to minimize the coverage of Iranian attacks and promote a narrative in which um, air defenses are effective, um, interceptors are shooting down drones, shooting down missiles. The Iron Dome is solid. Civilians are safe. Life goes on as usual. The war is progressing successfully for them, and we're going to keep losses to a minimum and return to normalcy in the short term. That's the narrative they're promoting, and so they need to suppress footage that would undermine that narrative. Strikes against their targets, against civilians, the destruction of buildings or infrastructure in the region. The Iranian narrative is one of resistance against outrageous and ruthless aggression by Israel and the United States. So they do not have a problem with the broadcasting strikes, especially against Tehran and especially against civilian targets. Indeed, at this point, even American sources are generally accepting of the idea that the strike against the girls' school in the first volleys of this war was American attack, Tomahawk cruise missile. Uh, Trump himself implied that this might be Iran on Iran, friendly fire or a misfire, but he was challenged by um, American reporters as to the veracity of that statement. They pointed out that this was a Tomahawk. Trump attempted to deflect by saying that, well, we sell Tomahawks to other countries. But the countries that have access to Tomahawk cruise missiles are strictly US allies. And Iran would, the chain of events that would lead to an Iranian Tomahawk style cruise missile misfiring and striking a target near one of its own facilities, a civilian target, girls' school. That just stretches credulity to the point where it's very difficult for even the most stalwart defenders of the administration to accept that particular line. So when you look at the mainstream media and the type of information that's being released from the conflict environment, you have a dearth of coverage of the Iranian attacks against U.S., Gulf, and Israeli targets, except in the cases where, as with Cyprus, Azerbaijan, and Turkey, there might be an escalatory narrative that's useful for the U.S.-Israeli war effort, and then extensive coverage of the violence in Iran, the devastation caused by U.S. and Israeli attacks, most notably the black rain resulting from strikes against oil facilities around Tehran, and the suffering of civilians as a result of large-scale bombardment in urban settings. That's the sort of official mainstream news fire hose of journalism. I would say that the best coverage, if you're looking for a particular source, comes from Al Jazeera. They're very responsible. They have an extensive network on the ground, people in every affected country, and the quality of their journalism is really first rate. I wouldn't put them. I consider them to be absolute peers of any Western news outlet at this point. The other great source of information, um, which has the exact opposite problem. If the mainstream media provides a limited view of the conflict that's shaped by the restrictions imposed by governments in the region, then social media provides an unfiltered fire hose of largely misinformation and disinformation where anybody can post pretty much anything. There, the issue is trying to parse what's true from what isn't. Um, you have conspiracy theorists, you have propagandists from every conceivable orientation, every conceivable intelligence agency, and foreign domestic government, as well as people who just freelance for the lols or are spreading clickbait in order to drive engagement to their own accounts. There's videos that will flatter every sensibility. If you want to see the Iron Dome in action, shooting down every possible projectile that Iran can launch, those are available by all means. If you want music videos of stalwart Israeli resistance and the heroes of the IDF, by all means, it's all there, as much as you can handle. If you want images of Tel Aviv in flames, of Israelis sifting through the rubble and experiencing the level of misery and anguish that people in Gaza have suffered for years at this point, by all means, there it is. Much of it AI, much of it falsely attributed. It's quite frequent that you have footage from previous conflicts or of unrelated events being presented as though it comes from this particular war and the countries that are being affected. You have footage from the Ukraine war, for instance, being subbed in for Tel Aviv or Tehran.
That's insane.
And there's an additional issue with the engagement of AI in this process. How many of these accounts are AI bots? The speed at which AI accounts can produce and disseminate false information is beyond the ability of people to keep up with. Now, there's an offsetting opportunity here, which is there's a little button on every tweet. You can click and you can ask Grok, is this real? That has been a useful tool, but it is also a deeply imperfect one. I think I may have mentioned before that there are videos that are clearly Tehran, that are clearly this conflict right now, that Grok misattributes as the LA fires. You can see street signs in Farsi but they tell you that it's the LA fires.
Mhm.
So um, I don't know how much of that is some kind of Elon tweaking to get more favorable outcomes from his AI tool. After all, we're not talking about a neutral, universal, open source AI, but we're talking about the personal property of a politically connected, and deeply compromised tech oligarch. So the it is extraordinarily difficult and time consuming to go through all of the information that's available and to try to vet it for um, reliability. Now, fortunately for you, you have me. Um, there are um, superpowered users. There are certain accounts which really have a stunning grasp of the tools available for so-called open source intelligence. And for those of you who might be more familiar with abbreviations of national security, there's SIGINT, signals intelligence, which is interceptions of adversarial communications. There's HUMINT, which is human intelligence, information from informants. And recently, we've seen the rise of OSINT, I guess is what you would call it, open source intelligence, where you can just go online, look stuff up,
Mhm.
and analyze events in close to real time. Now, this open source intelligence, like I said, the biggest problem is parsing through the quality of the sources, but there are a few assets, there are a few resources which are quite reliable and which are commercially available. Because the exact same types of information services that are extremely valuable in peacetime for commercial reasons. For instance, if you're the owner of a shipping line, you want to know where your vessels are.
Mhm.
If you're the owner of a airline or you operate in civil aviation, then you want to know where planes are flying. You want to know which zones of are open and closed to air traffic. And with the development of the commercial internet, with increased availability of online resources, and with the multipolarity of um, having different nodes that all can have access to this kind of information, it's now possible to um, find these sources, even if you're just a regular member of the public, hence open source intelligence. And what I've seen online is really quite striking. There, it's gotten to the point where through carefully parsing official Israeli or American um, information sources, sometimes of the military themselves, sometimes journalism, sometimes um, things like the um, personal social media accounts of individual servicemen, you can identify specific locations that might have a strategic value. And there is a subculture of OSINT enthusiasts on Twitter that are um, using these techniques to um, pick out Israeli bases or Israeli industrial sites, then uploading satellite images and specific coordinates, Google Map sheets, and everything,
Damn.
and then adding the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps um, to the conversation. I do not know to what extent this is compromising the security of the war effort. I do know that this is enough of a concern so that a senior officer in AFCENT, the U.S. Air Force Central Headquarters, has flagged the proliferation of open source um, AI augmented intelligence as a major threat to operational security. In one case, shortly about um, a couple of internet sleuths located an array of satellite dishes and other instruments associated with the Israeli space program, which obviously has a dual use capability and implications for communications, intelligence, early warning. They found the location online. They screenshot the uh, Google Maps image, found the satellite pictures, sent the coordinates out on Twitter. An hour later, it gets struck by Iranian missiles. Could be a coincidence, right? The Iranians, especially if you, um, at this point, it's well documented that they're receiving intelligence support from Russia at the very least, possibly China as well. These are very sophisticated militaries, very sophisticated intelligence services that they likely identified this target well ahead of time. It's a pretty obvious type of thing to go after, but maybe the timing is related to the tweet in the sense that this is a way of encouraging the online activists to continue their efforts because maybe they'll discover something that has fallen through the cracks. Um, for instance, I've seen other users post images and the specific location of the only cement factory in Israel. I
Mhm.
don't know if that's still standing. Quite frankly, I discovered some of these accounts just this morning, so I'm learning about this and keeping you abreast in real time. But this does represent a significant change in the way that wars are fought and a new vector for intelligence analysis, augmentation, and potentially misinformation operations, right? It's only a matter of time before people start putting up um, the residence of that guy who cut them off in traffic or that bitch Sandra from HR and labeling it as Bibi Netanyahu's house, right? Um, the prospects here are really quite staggering and intimidating. So that's what I wanted to lead with a deep dive there. I've got a couple of other topics that I wanted to flag before we get the hour out, but let's take some questions in the meantime.
We only have a couple because people are just listening to the analysis. This is from Stefan, our very own Stefan. Does the U.S. Congress not parliamentary pillage? Do the U.S. Congress? Let me put it on here.
Hmm.
Do the U.S. Congress not parliamentary privileges to say more than others would be able to?
Ah,
Does I think
so
it does the U.S. Congress?
the this has come up in the context of the Epstein files.
Okay.
One major technique to suppress information coming out publicly for well-connected, deep-pocketed individuals such as Donald Trump personally, Epstein, you name it, is to apply what's called lawfare against anybody who makes assertions against them, whether true or not. If you're sued for libel or slander, especially by somebody with very strong legal representation and very deep pockets, then it can be ruinous to defend yourself. Even if you get a positive outcome, there's no guarantee that your legal costs will be covered. So this produces a chilling effect. People are too worried about the legal blowback to go public with claims that may be entirely true and may be well substantiated. There is parliamentary privilege in the US Congress, and most notably Thomas Massey and Rotana took advantage of that privilege in reading out names of powerful people that they discovered in the Epstein files as possible co-conspirators. Whatever is delivered in Congress cannot serve as the basis for that kind of lawsuit, and that's the privilege that you're talking about. Now, that has to do um, with um, civil litigation on issues of national security and breaching um, classified information to the public. Those are a different set of charges, and parliamentary privilege, I don't believe would apply. Um, After all, they even got Trump and Biden on the mishandling of classified information, so they could easily go after a senator or congressional representative that reveals too much in public statements.
This next question is from Red. Kuba, how long can Trump keep manipulating the oil price and stock market in general with his statements before people finally stop listening and the price of oil soars?
So I think that there are two impacts here that we need to disaggregate, at least two. When Trump says something, then it's a little like the what was the name of the company that Redditors pumped up against short sellers?
The
EA
GameStop thing?
Games,
Yeah, the GameStop.
GameStop,
Yeah.
GameStop,
Yeah.
exactly. So you have GameStop type scenarios in which information that's put out reaches retail investors and they collectively respond to it, and that produces a movement in whether it be oil futures or stock valuation. That's one form of influence that Trump can push. There's the second order impact also embedded there, which is that people hear what Trump is saying, don't believe him, but believe that enough other people will believe him so that it will produce a movement. And therefore, you don't even need to have credulity on the part of a significant portion of the market to see a change anyway, because you just need a few true believers to be the ones pushing the initial price fluctuation, which then gets reinforced, and it becomes some volatility trading, an opportunity for sufficiently cynical finance operators to try to basically pump and dump on this information. Now, that's one vector for Trump's statements. Another is, and this is, I can't tell you to what extent this plays in, but Trump surrounds himself with billionaires through the Trump organization and through his network of associations. He can mobilize billions, probably hundreds of billions of dollars of capital to make trades and movements in one way or another. So when he makes a statement, there's a change in price that reflects responses to that statement. But he also may be on the phone talking with the heads of hedge funds, talking with well connected oligarchs, talking to people who owe him favors, and telling them which way to bet. Go, the price needs to go down, the price needs to go up. And if you have enough money behind you, then you can move markets on your own. We've seen this before when different well-pocketed hedge funds, private equity, you name it, finance vultures of different feathers, use their um, substantial position in order to do things like corner the silver market. And that one reason that you go along with this rather than looking at the fundamentals of the financial market and the underlying economy is that the money is real, even if the information is not, right? Like you make money on the movement of the market, not on underlying shifts in the global economy or geopolitical developments. So as long as this is working, then people may be taking advantage of it just to goose another 2 5% short-term returns. After all, if that's why you're in the game, why wouldn't you?
We have some more questions. Or did you want to move on to your next point? Let's move on to the next point. We'll get to these questions towards the end.
Okay, the tying back into the OSINT conversation. One reason why this can't be easily contained, like unlike mainstream media narratives, is that the capability has gone global, and there is for instance, extensive satellite mapping available from Chinese companies. There's Chinese AI services that are available online, and they'll reach down to consumers. Um, there's, for instance, recently I discovered a few accounts which, and this is just marketing for them, right? In almost real time, they will show you satellite images of facilities being struck in glorious resolution that have national security sensitivity for Gulf states, for the United States, for Iran, for Israel, doesn't matter who, right? This is credible information. They can provide it. The first hit is for free, and the rest, right? Like that's how you get a subscription service going. And the and that makes me pivot to um, my next point, which is also related to China. And I have to say, I want to thank everybody for the support and interest in this series. I want to thank Jason. This is a great opportunity to engage with a subject that's very significant to me, and I value the feedback and this opportunity to really go deep on this topic. And I want to welcome everybody from Left Reckoning who has maybe joined today. And now I'm going to burn all of that goodwill. The,
Hell yeah.
the recently, I believe it's ongoing. In China, they're convening the People's Congress. That's the main legislative body of the People's Republic of China. It's a big deal when it does convene. It's not like the Senate or Congress where it's a standing body, but they have these occasional substantial sessions which bring in activists from all over China and across all segments of the Communist Party. This isn't, of course, a regular Western style parliamentary legislature where there's debate and question period. And, you know, if you've seen images, especially of the UK Parliament, right, you'll get some great insult comedy coming out of both the uh, opposition and the government. I have to say, UK prime ministers seem incredibly dull and boring until you hear them responding to question time. Then it's like, oh, damn, somebody debated at Oxford. Um, but um, the People's Congress is a vehicle for converting policy that's been developed through the communist leadership, that's been debated in the Politburo, and converting that into official doctrine that then becomes the foundation. It's almost like a constitutional amendment rather than a regular law. And my view, my deeply moral relativist view on international politics, on global affairs, is that uh, countries have different political systems. Some of them have greater degrees of openness and participation, some of them less. Some of them have greater degrees of protection for individual rights and liberties, some of them less. But China is, uh, in a lot of ways, just a normal country. People live normal lives there. Its government does some things extremely well, such as development, some things very badly. Of course, it is far from stainless, especially with respect to individual rights. It's a heavy, intense surveillance state. There's heavy controls on freedom of expression and the flow of information. Ironically, Chinese capabilities increase the access to information internationally because we now have an adversarial source that undercuts censorship and manipulation from Western governments. But within China, the restrictions on information are extreme, even compared to the delusions of the Western far right about countries like the UK or institutions like the EU. It is repressive in that sense. Um, and the reality is that there have been very serious campaigns against Uyghur and Tibetan communities in China, especially. There's fears that those ethnic identities, and in the case of and religious identities, could drive anti-regime behavior, especially since those communities have, a sound basis to hold some grudges against the PRC. I bring this all up because it looks almost certain that a new ethnic unity law will be passed in Beijing through the upcoming People's Congress.
Ethnic unity law?
Yes, precisely. And it's about as bad as it sounds.
Okay.
The the PRC, in line with the Soviet Union and with Marxist-Leninist models on accommodating diversity within large multi-ethnic, ideologically driven polities, um, originally had a system which granted a very high degree of legal and formal recognition and rights to its minority groups. I believe they recognize something like 55 um, minority groups, and even the nationalists in China competing against um, the PRC have promoted an idea of at least five national groups: Manchu, Tibetan, Uyghur, and Mongol, as well as Han Chinese, as forming um, this kind of community, this pan-ethnic Chinese state, Chinese citizenship community that transcends individual cultural ethnic groups. In uh, moves to suppress Uyghur and Tibetan calls for autonomy and the ability for ethnic minorities within China to try to mobilize politically. Uh, Recently, the Communist Party has moved away from that model and has stopped talking about the Chinese people towards a nationalist model referring to the Chinese nation. And within the Chinese nation, of course, there are ethnic groups, but the new law enshrines policy which establishes that there is a Han identity and a Mandarin Chinese language that serves as the umbrella to which ethnic minorities need to be subordinated. Um, the law includes provisions that indicate that the reason why we might study or promote non-Mandarin language groups within China is not to maintain them as living languages for cultural communities, but to prevent them from disappearing entirely for academic reasons. The signage, for instance, going forward is supposed to be bilingual at a minimum, with Mandarin more prominently displayed than minority languages. The There is the exhortation, right, as guiding principle for policy to challenge and eliminate backwards habits and customs among minority groups, which effectively means the assimilation towards Han normativity. And this model is being presented quite explicitly as a response to and a repudiation of Western multiculturalism and the promotion of minority rights. Indeed, much of the presentation of this in Chinese media has been, this is a new model that we're adopting in China, and we want to promote internationally as a superior means of creating ethnic harmony and social peace in multi-ethnic states. Now, I'm not Han, I'm not Chinese. Um, But for me, as a Canadian multiculturalist, I I, I treat this with some alarm, and I fear that this may develop in the direction of something like the Israeli nation state law. And we recognize how disruptive that has been to minority groups within Israel, and how it has enabled things like the suppression of Palestinians in the occupied territories, Gaza and the West Bank.
Exactly. Yeah.
Um, so for me, to answer the question of what fresh hell, um, I'm alarmed at this development in the PRC. My deepest hope is that the People's Republic of China moderates and develops in softer, kinder, gentler direction rather than hardening around surveillance, political monopoly, and I hate to say it, but Han chauvinism. And for me, this is a disappointment and a step backwards. And I think that as observers of the geopolitical situation, to try to evaluate how the future conditions are going to develop, this is something that we should all observe and keep in mind.
As far as the Strait of Hormuz, what's going on there? Uh, how is this going to affect global trade moving forward? Because it's going to be hard to negotiate anything with Iran. And if Trump is going to play the I'm taking my ball and going home, we got victory because we blew up some stuff kind of game, which is very Trumpian. And I feel like he's going to do that.
Yeah.
Because he's a man of firsts. He really enjoys being firsts or greats. So if he can say, well, I took out their nuclear targets, we took out X, Y, and Z, and we made them, I don't know, capitulate to something he'll make up and walk away and find another uh, uh, travesty or
Yes.
international crime to commit.
Exactly.
What happens with global trade if that's just left alone?
Stefan made a great point that he's surprised that the Gulf states never built a railroad. And the simple explanation for why the Strait of Hormuz remains so important, despite being such an obvious choke point, right? No one was surprised. No one was shocked to see the Iranians flex like this, except maybe the low IQ cabinet that's running Washington D.C. But there is some infrastructure going east-west and allowing them to circumvent the Strait of Hormuz. But that goes through Saudi, which means that if any of the other Gulf states, Qatar, UAE, Bahrain is screwed because it's an island, right? There's a causeway connecting it to the mainland, but uh, obviously it's much more vulnerable to being cut off. How the mainland Gulf states, they have um, avoided dependency on Saudi, which is what um, a solution that an overland solution would imply, because you just have to go through Saudi territory. They would own any rail link. They're the only ones with a pipeline. Presumably, the Emiratis, the Qataris could connect with that pipeline. It's less attractive for Qatar because it's an oil pipeline. You know, Qatar is a major producer of natural gas, but the Emiratis have also failed to attach themselves to that infrastructure, and rail link is non-existent, as Stefan pointed out, and that largely has to do with the allergy that the Gulf royals have to Saudi regional domination. Now, you could potentially go through Oman instead. Frankly, that's pretty attractive because you get past not only the Strait of Hormuz choke point, but also the Gulf of Aden choke point. and the Red Sea. You could two birds with one stone that way. You get out from under the Houthis and out from under the Iranians. Plus, for the UAE, you have a border with Oman. You wouldn't even need to necessarily get the Saudis involved. That, however, is expensive because the terrain is unfavorable. Those conditions. It's mountainous. You'd be building infrastructure in the open desert. Conditions would be very harsh. Also, if the risk is Iranian missiles and your vulnerability is to airstrikes, unless you're going to build tunnels or invest in air defenses along the entire route, well, one track, two tracks, three tracks, 20 drones, and then you've disrupted the $1 investment for an overland route, and which gets you back to square one, right? In the Strait of Hormuz. Global trade, we've seen disruptions before, thanks to the Houthis in the Gulf, or to the incompetent ship captain that managed to wedge a freighter in the Suez Canal a few years ago. And in those cases, you can just reroute around the Cape of Good Hope. It adds about a third to the travel time, and of course increases costs concurrently with that. But there's no limits to how many ships you can send around the Cape of Good Hope. There's no choke points once you get past the Strait of Malacca in Southeast Asia, and that's a completely different theater. So on that kind of trade, there's alternatives. The big question is, of course, energy. Right? How do you get the oil out? How do you supply China? How do you supply Japan, Southeast Asia, South Korea? Part of the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative has been part of the strategic motivation behind that has been precisely to avoid these kinds of choke points. But there are some issues with that. One is the Ukraine war. If you're moving freight overland from China to Western Europe, to Western Central Europe, full stop, then the most direct route is through Russia. But the Ukraine war has cut off those overland connections. For about a year or two after the outbreak of the conflict, thanks to the fiction of Belarusian neutrality, you did have the BRI transiting through Belarus to get into Europe, but the Poles cut that off. There is also the new prospect of an Arctic channel between East Asia and North America, and North America, but also Western Europe. You could potentially, during summer months, go along the Russian coast around Kamchatka, through the Barents Sea, all the way to Scandinavia, sail down around Norway, reach ports in the UK, Rotterdam. This actually is shorter than the Suez Canal route geographically, but it highly depends on Russian participation, because along that route you have very intense weather conditions, even under optimal seasons. And you need a resupply capability, you need a search and rescue capability, you need to have communications infrastructure in place to make sure that freighters making that transit can be secured and monitored the whole way through. And if China is trading with Europe and Russia doesn't like it, it kind of has a veto right there. There have been investments made, especially by Chinese companies, and with the support of the Chinese government as part of a northern Belt and Road, to develop this alternative. But it's very much at preliminary stages. I think that the this does show the fragility of long supply chains and the vulnerability of international shipping to geopolitical disruptions, and it may encourage more reshoring of production to the core economies. We may see Europe doing more for itself. Uh, the whole tariff plan that Trump has been pushing ever since he was inaugurated has had reshoring of capabilities as being one of its main objectives. So this dovetails um, with Trump's agenda. Um, Also, this plays into the Carney plan for a EU comprehensive plan for Trans-Pacific Partnership link up, because there the main routes, the main vectors are through the Suez Canal or through Canada, connecting the Asia Pacific with Europe rather than relying on the Indian Ocean and the Middle East. But the big problem is just energy, right? And it's not even my understanding, and I'm open to being connected here because I'm not a full specialist on um, the energy industry, but the big issue is not raw production, but refining capability and storage. If you look at the numbers coming out of the United States, Canada, other producers, there's potentially enough oil production to go around, but refining is much more limited. The investments required are enormous. The technology is sophisticated and finicky, and because of obvious economic advantages, much of that was located in the Gulf. It's notable that the oil installations that are being hit, especially by the Iranians, are not production sites, but refineries and ports. So that's where the choke point is. Right? It's not getting the stuff out of the ground necessarily. It's converting it into usable fuels and getting those to market.
Now, let's get to some of these questions. We do have a few. Um, Kuba, how is this conflict affecting the Russian and Ukrainian war? I believe I read somewhere that oil and LNG sanctions against Russia have been lifted due to Hormuz closure.
Yes, I've heard that as well, and the specifics of um, I I confirmed that um, the Trump has waived sanctions with respect to India. So Russia can now import oil and gas to India without triggering any sanctions restrictions. I think that this reflects the importance that India has taken on as a staging point and a logistics uh, hub for the U.S. war effort, as that network of bases in the Persian Gulf has been steadily eroded, and we've seen U.S. and allied forces moving back out of Gulf bases. Um, I believe that earlier today, the Bahraini airport evacuated a substantial fleet of airplanes because perhaps Bahrain can no longer prevent large scale attacks. It's run out of interceptors. It's run out of the ability to defend its airport. So if that's the case, then yeah, you're moving further away. You're fighting not in the Gulf. I don't think there are any American warships in the Gulf, but you're fighting from the Arabian Sea, the Red Sea, and the Mediterranean. You're moving back out, and India has become a vital linchpin in that effort. So India got a pass. It has less to do with Russia and more to do with India in terms of um, who who benefits and who had the incentive, who had the leverage in that particular negotiation. Um, so there's some reason to think that it's not clear cut whether the outbreak of Iran as a new front favors the Ukrainians or the Russians. One issue that's been flagged is that Ukraine has always had a high demand for Patriot missile batteries and other air defense systems. Now they're not going to get any of them. If, in fact, they may lose what little they have that gets redeployed towards Israel and the Gulf. Now, this is not as big a deal as it may sound because the Ukrainians never had a lot of Patriots. They always wanted them. They were always hoping to get some, but the U.S., especially under the Trump administration, has held out supplying those defensive systems as part of, as one of their cards against Zelensky. So you're losing something you didn't have. How much does that hurt? The Ukrainians have, and I alluded to this on a previous show, and a very capable and very low cost defensive systems for shooting down Shahed style drones. Russia employs massive amounts of these Iranian designed drones in Ukraine, and the Ukrainians could not afford the types of systems that the US fields and have come up with. It looks like a grappling hook gun almost. And basically, it's a system where you point it at the Shahed and you fire it, and out comes a little drone that is capable of tracking. I don't know if it's AI or optical targeting systems, but it'll lock onto the drone and just fly into it at fast enough speed to bring it down. Cheap, easy, right? We're talking about a system that costs thousands of dollars, cheaper even than the Shahed, right? Which flips the economics of drone defense from advantaging the attacker to advantaging the defender. So that's a huge deal, right? In fact, um, this might serve as the basis for an economic renaissance in Ukraine as that country is able to license and export these defensive systems, which now everyone in the world will want. There's the question, too, of the supply of Shahed drones for Russian operations. The main, while the drones are being built in Russia, one of the largest facilities building these drones is Russian. The Russians only can produce about 80% of the drone domestically. Iran, recognizing that leverage is important in these kinds of relationships, has withheld 20% of the components and the tech so that Russia needs to continue purchasing, continuing supporting Iran in its confrontation with the West and with Israel, and can't just cut it out of the loop and build the Shaheds from zero themselves. So potentially, this war reduces the ability of Russia to produce its own variant, and as a result, undermines its ability to wage war in Ukraine. Now, honestly, that argument for me seems a little optimistic because in the brute reality where both sides are fighting a war and Russian facilities are more secure and potentially more productive than Iranian ones, they'll find some arrangement to maximize production so everybody has their drones. And that is a way that this could potentially advantage Russia, right? You move that IP into the Russian industrial sector, and Russia can now build more of these drones domestically without the limit of Iranian components, which I would be extremely nervous if I worked at that facility in Russia, because it has always been a strategic target for Ukraine, and now it will be an essential must destroy, top of
Yeah.
the list. And the Ukrainians have demonstrated both the ability to strike deeper and deeper into Russia with things such with weapons such as the Flamingo, which is a combination rocket drone, and also conduct operations. I believe that the code name was Spiderweb or something,
Hmm.
where Ukrainian infiltrators with falsified Russian identities entered the Russian Federation, fanned out to various strategic locations, air bases largely, and simultaneously struck airfields from the far north near Murmansk all the way to Yakutsk, destroying a large number of strategic Russian airframes. The They could probably do the same um, with Shahid drone factory. It would take time, but the Russian society, the Russian state is not as effectively totalitarian. It's not as locked down as China. There's corruption and different ways of um, interfacing and penetrating uh, the Russian border defenses. And finally, um, Ukrainians, they look and talk and sound like Russians. Right? It's not hard. The familiarity with Russian culture and the Russian language on the Ukrainian side is absolute. You can. It's not like, hello, my name is Thomas American Son, and I am traveling to U.S. Capitol for defense convention. Could you tell me where missiles are located? Right? It's not that. Um, they could definitely pass. So I would, I think that what you really need to look at are those shot-in production sites within Russia. If they're hit, then Ukraine is winning. If they manage to increase operation, if the output of weapons is augmented because of the transfer of Iranian technology and increased capital from oil sales, then obviously the advantage falls on the Russian side.
This is from Dizzle. Will this war in Iran lead to the collapse, balkanization of the U.S. empire? Why or why not?
Okay, I don't want to be the Chinese professor guy. Um,
You can say you don't know.
the Yeah, I don't know how this develops.
Yeah.
I can give you some thoughts,
We're
but
going to do a show
um,
on the Chinese professor guy, by the way. We don't want to say his name. It
yeah,
is like Beetlejuice if you say it three times.
yeah, I want in because frankly, he strikes me as Jordan Peterson for the anti-imperial set. Um,
Mm.
but the I think that it's going to definitely reorient the Gulf states away from the United States. It's possible, there's potentially some way, especially if there's a relatively quick resolution where you might be able to paper over differences. There's a lot of inertia in international affairs. So, but it seems difficult to maintain any credibility with the Gulf states as a security partner, given what they're experiencing right now. I think that Saudi Arabia becomes a more significant regional player as a result. I One development that we've seen in terms of European allies is that you have um, Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez, Pedro, right? First name
Yeah.
Pedro, in Spain that's taken, like the Antifa line on this war, and to the point where Trump wants Witkoff and Jared Kushner to cut him off entirely. Let's not talk to Spain anymore. While Merz has been very strident in promoting the idea of defending Israel and confronting the regime of the Islamic Republic. Um, so you've got some division inside of NATO. People, I think that it's better to look at actions rather than rhetoric. And what we've seen is France deploying some of its assets to the Mediterranean and to the Arabian Sea in order to try to. Um, the official position is that this is a defensive operation, right? We don't want the Israelis to be hit. We don't want Cyprus to be hit. Maybe you should talk to the Israelis about that. But we're going to be supporting anti-missile air defense operations with Israel and the United States, and troop naval assets positioned along the Strait of Hormuz are there for when the fighting dies down, and could guarantee access and stability for trade in a post-conflict scenario. There's some indication that French are operating within the Persian Gulf, going after doing something. I don't know. It might be evacuating key personnel. It might be some sort of special operations. It may be moves against the Iranians. But France is engaged there. And in Lebanon, it has come out, interestingly enough, not on the side of Israel, but on the side of the Lebanese government. And in Lebanon, there's this tricky triangular politics because you have a Lebanese government, which is distinct, internationally recognized, sort of the official lawful government, which also is really bad and corrupt. Right? And when I say bad, I don't necessarily mean that they commit atrocities. That's not really their thing, but they're just not very good at governing. There was an explosion in the port of Beirut a few years ago that had largely to do with just incompetent management on the part of government institutions. Then you have Hezbollah, which needs no introduction, and you have Israel. So three different sides, basically all at war with one another. The Israelis strike Lebanese state institutions as well as Hezbollah. Um, and France has come down on the side of the Lebanese government. Whether there's any appetite for confrontation with Israel, I doubt it. But um, Israel has used the instability associated with Gaza to grab land, not just in Palestine, but also to creep up into Lebanon and into Syria, right? People forget about the Golan Heights, but that was once an occupied territory too, now fully annexed into Israel. So perhaps France is trying to prevent that kind of land grab. France has a huge Muslim population, a huge Arab and huge Levantine population, unlike the United States, where you have immigrants disproportionately from opposition groups. Iranian Americans are very anti-regime, for instance. Cuban Americans, Marco Rubio, you name it. But in France, there's much more sympathy for the existing governments or resistance groups. Islamic terrorism has been a big problem in Europe. It's died down recently, but a couple of years ago, there were all of the car rammings across France and Germany. And before that, there were straight up ISIS atrocities. One reason why I think Spain has taken such an Antifa stance towards this war is that it just announced an amnesty for migrants living in Spain, which means that there will be hundreds of thousands more Spanish citizens with deep personal, familial, sentimental connections to the Middle East. Why antagonize them, right? In fact, obviously, you're going to want to side with future Spaniards over Israel if that's the choice in front of you. So you have South Korea, um, increasingly alarmed and upset that missile defenses, which were supposed to protect Seoul, are being deployed to the Gulf at the exact same time that North Korea is testing a nuclear capable rocket.
Yeah.
That test was announced today. You have anxiety, but on the flip side, you have Australia sending air-to-air missiles, and I previously talked about the importance of AWACS style radar communications early warning aircraft in the context of the destruction of the ground-based systems across the Middle East. So you have Australia sending one of their E-7 Wedgetails, the next generation AWACS, to support the American effort in the Persian Gulf. You know, it's a defensive capability. They're not bombing Iran, but still, uh, that's a strong indication that they are still interested in maintaining connection with the United States. So I think this is going to weaken uh, the U.S. empire. I think that its security relationships have been under a great deal of strain ever since Trump got elected. There's the question of whether NATO is a live actor or not. Europe has definitely begun to rearm, um, and Canada is attempting to create some kind of architecture for middle powers to secure their economies and their security situation without reliance on the United States. But those efforts are all in their early stages. For the time being, many countries that have been traditional American allies, regardless of how they feel about the future, still need the U.S. to offset what they see as more significant threats from unfriendlier powers. Right? Unfortunately, like I said earlier, China with this ethnic unity law, it's definitely the sort of thing that will complicate the ability to negotiate a closer relationship with Western countries, even on the pragmatic basis, trade, technology, all of that kind of stuff, the economics of it, that'll go forward because there's interest on both sides, practical interest on both sides. But um, there are barriers to friendship and partnership and long-term convergence that that can get in the way of deepening ties further. And I think this is one of them.
We have another question here from James Rodriguez. If Kuba knows so much, then why hasn't he solved the conflict yet? Checkmate, leftists. There you go.
I would be happy just to break 10K views on this video, man.
Yeah.
Right? Like, help a brother out, you know?
This is another one. A new commenter here. Army of the Antichrist says, not a question, Kuba, but magic voodoo is 100% real. The psychological model of magic is racist bullshit. Witchcraft is a powerful weapon of class warfare. Socialists need to embrace magic. Checkmate.
So is that two checkmates?
I said
like,
checkmate at the end. I added the checkmate on there because it felt like one of those like ball game leftists.
I'm sorry, but chess is also some racist bullshit in this context, obviously. We should be playing that the African game with the holes and you put the pebbles in it.
Are you making up another
I want to
racism?
say could very well be.
The
I want
African
to say it's
game
baklava, but I'm just digging myself a deeper
like
hole.
figures. There's a bunch of. Have you seen Wakanda Forever?
Mhm.
There's an African game you can
Exactly.
play. Apparently people in the chat know it. There's a bunch of Africans in the chat. And
Wankala.
the final.
Wankala. That's the name I was looking for. But presumably there's multiple names for it. But look, like, I don't want to get Charlie Kirk, so I'm not going to say anything about the left-hand path. But I'm pretty firmly set on the materialist interpretation here. Um, but like you do, you do.
And the final question is from Dizzle. He says, with the collapse of the American empire, will I, as a white collar professional, have to start selling my bussy on the street? If so, where and how much should I sell it for? Well, it all boils down to where
I
you
mean
live.
that to answer that question, I think we need a discussion offline, and I'm going to need some pictures to start. But the I strongly recommend cultivating some practical skills, just not even from the perspective of the geopolitical end times, but you know, gardening, carpentry, um, mushroom foraging. If you're one of my people, these help you touch grass. They are good for your mental health. And once your bussy reaches its expiration date, they can also be bartered for clean water, sheep, gold, women. Maybe you'll be the one buying in those days.
Drea says I didn't answer. I didn't see your question, Drea, so I apologize. Thank you, Kuba, for spending, for me, the morning with us here afternoon. I know you have a lot of busy Death Star things to do, Ewoks to torture and such. That's why every thumbnail here is a Star Wars Imperial thumbnail. There you go. It's part of the Kuba lore. I will be back
Like
later.
that sad guy from Andor.
Yes. Yeah, we have to. Should I get some Andor ones? I need to get the white Imperial suit ones. We'll get some. I have some ideas for the next show. Thank you, Kuba. Have a very
That
good.
mock-up where he photoshopped.
I don't
Jason.
know how to
Yeah.
do it well enough where it would be cool, but I did want to put your face on Krennic from Rogue One. Trust me, it was. I was trying. I was definitely trying. Thank you guys for watching. I will be back later tonight at our regular time, 6 p.m. with the p.m. Pacific with metalcore legend Doc Coyle. On that note, on behalf of Kuba and everyone at TIR, we are out. Thank y'all.